Elise over here. So this book blew my mind, and I've been kind of obsessed with Elise on the heels of reading this book and just before. So I'm really excited to have a conversation about this. There are so many things to talk about related to this book. So the thing is, I think we should just dive into today. Has anything happened that, like, to me, something happened? So I'm basically asking myself this, but has anything happened that makes you feel like, despite or because of the awareness that you have of all of these attributes or experiences that we have imposed on ourselves, like, what has happened where you go? For me, I'll just say today I had a moment of the sloth thing, and I was so aware of it because of your book, and then I didn't know, I felt so irritated. What happened? So Elise, can you ask me about my experience?
I like interviewing people more than I like being interviewed. So watch out. Although I'm sure many people are super here too.
No.
So, what happened?
I would like to talk a little bit about sloth,
Okay.
because somebody asked me what my hobbies are today,
Oh.
and I had such an angry reaction in my head. I was very polite, but in my head I was like, how at this point, when I have kids at home and I'm working, am I also expected to have a hobby to seem like an adaptive person who, like, has enough free time and fun that they have created joy through hobbies?
Yeah.
Like, I don't have my hobby is to chill.
Yeah.
But I have always felt like a little embarrassed about it till I read this book, and then somebody asked me, and I got right back into my place of shame.
Yeah. No, that's so
Explain.
funny that you actually mentioned that. I'm staring. I don't think Brian, one of my school dad friends, was there, but yesterday we were at a birthday party and the dad was talking about how he didn't really like his day job, that he had so many hobbies, that unpaid hobbies that require a lot of time away, like intensive backpacking, motorbiking across China, and his climbing wall at his house. And I was like, God, it is so nice for you. All of my hobbies are really jobbies. And yeah, I don't have everything, every moment of my day, more or less, except when I'm at his birthday parties. But that's kind of work, is spent producing, more or less, for my family. And I don't know how many of you guys have the book or read the book, but
you must. It's so wonderful.
thank you. But I start with sloth because it's so accessible, particularly I think for moms, because when you're resource constrained in all the ways, the idea of putting your own wants ahead of other people's needs is even more anathema than it already is in this culture. So this tirelessness that chases so many of us is persistent and really hard to interrupt.
And what's the balance between recognizing whatever you get out of the things that keep you motivated, the positives that you get out of it, and productivity, and then, like, being able to have the experience of stillness without it being shameful? Or on the other side of it, I think there's the other side of it is also it goes back to what you say, it's all about balance, because the other side of it could be a sense that you're less than because you're too productive. If the intention comes from actually feeling like you're living exactly as you want to, and it's not some kind of hamster wheel.
Yeah. No, I think it's really, I haven't achieved that in this sense. It's funny now, I'm like running over with it. When you asked me, I had a deer in headlights moment, but now I'm like all the time. I mean, I did a puzzle this week, which is problematic for me. I don't know, are any of you guys avid puzzlers? It's like or drug for me where I can't stop. I stayed up until 2 a.m. one night and I got nothing done. And I was like, but is this virtuous? Aren't puzzles like virtuous in our culture? They are. But yeah, there's no balance for me. When people ask me what I do for fun, I stall out. It's like a do not shoot message. I don't know. I have no idea what I do for fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That question really freaks me out.
Yeah.
Now taking it back just for everybody, can you just go through the sins?
List them?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll just do them in the order in the book. They, theoretically, the way that this monk wrote them down, pride was the head sin because it suggested that you didn't need God. But I don't lead with pride. So I do them sloth, envy, pride, gluttony, greed, lust, anger, and then originally they were 8 thoughts. They were not sins. They didn't become the cardinal vices until the 6th century. And the 8th thought was sadness, which was dropped from the list that I include in the book, with the idea being that I think the fear of sadness is described by this monk Evagrius Ponticus as having a feminine soul, and that it is primarily lodged in the lives and minds of men, and that the severing of men from their feelings, the primary symptom of that is toxic masculinity and a culture that's a little off balance and just a little, and that part of sort of restoring collective balance is reconnecting men with their feelings and letting them process and experience grief.
So when you look at these, like how could you say here in this shorter period of time that everybody can read the book, transformed them into what they are meant to be?
Yeah, I think that the sins are just essentially a list of essential human impulses. They are sort of what make us human. And they were originally in 590 assigned to Mary Magdalene as the carrier of the vices. And I think from that, this idea that women have been trained and programmed for goodness, while men have been trained and programmed for power, it's just a persistent cultural idea that's whispered into our ears. And when the worst thing really that you can do or say about a woman is reputational, and is that she's bad, uncaring, mean, toxic, whatever it may be. Like, whereas men can commit crimes and we still revere them for being powerful. This idea, this fear of our quote unquote badness means that we're suppressing anything that comes up that we have code as bad, we suppress it rather than letting it emerge and experiencing it as like part of being human, of being a whole human. We are all things. And so the vices, and the book isn't sort of a like, let's be lustful and greedy. It's not that. I mean, sure, to each your own, no judgment. But it is more an invitation to examine these appetites and wants and reconcile them, and rather than deny them. And I don't know, I spent a lot of energy in my life resisting being hungry or wanting more or having a dream for myself and being concerned that that will be perceived as being too much. So the idea, I think, is that we are inherently good. It is fact. Nobody can take it from us. Yes, people become distorted, lots of feelings about that, but that who we are at our root is good, and it's not something that can be adjudicated by a priest or a parent or a judge or a boss or a friend.
You know, the name of the title of the book, On Our Best Behavior, it's just so interesting because you're not saying, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but to me, being on our best behavior is not the same thing as being good.
Yeah.
And that whatever feelings or impulses or experiences you want to have, apart from harming others, has nothing to do with good versus bad. our behavior is something that's just like expected of us.
Yeah.
And that's where we might be confusing what's going on inside of each of us and what our impulses are and our hopes and dreams are and what feelings we are experiencing, and that those somehow turned into being good or bad. And it's behavior that's like, I do find those to be separate. And then on top of that, you're talking about behavior as well.
Yeah.
But I do feel like there are two separate things at play. One is just like, what are you? We're all in, there's no wrong or right feeling, full stop.
Yeah.
And there are no wrong or right impulses. If you act on some of them that are harmful to others, that would be bad.
Yeah.
But that's so different than acting on things that aren't hurting anybody. They're just making you, expose certain feelings that have been considered naughty or sinful or whatever.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, you're the child shrink, but the way that we now are sort of conscious of, like, instead of condemning our children, it's like we condemn the behavior, right? Like, you distinguish between who someone is and how they're maybe acting or tantruming or whatever it is. But that's kind of new, right?
Totally.
Like, this, instead of this sort of wholesale condemnation of someone, only now, I think, are we starting to think granularly around how we actually talk about these things and judge potentially, although judging and loving, mutually exclusive.
I remember when my daughter, forgive me if I've said this to you before, but I remember when my daughter was 4, which I feel like is okay to say because she's 16 now, so I mean,
Different person.
Also, she's definitely not watching.
Not yet.
Although she did read this book and loved it. Because I do think with your teenagers, older teenagers, it's pretty sophisticated stuff, but there's a lot to talk about with them. And this sets up really cool conversations. But I remember when she was 4, she was so upset because she had horrible thoughts, and she had bad thoughts about her sister. I definitely will do this as I'm saying it. And she was worried that she was going to get in trouble with God for her thoughts and her feelings about her sister, who she thought was stupid. I mean, she's 4, so it's very simple. Her thoughts were pretty basic thoughts about siblings, but she was so distraught and worried. And I said to her, first of all, I don't know where the God thing came in. I had never said to her, like, be careful what you do or say or think because God might be watching, but that was her perception. And so when I told her the big news that whatever's going on inside there is fair game and it's just what you choose to do with it, she was so relieved because I think later in life, as she's gotten older, those thoughts have gotten a bit more complicated and potentially things we shouldn't know about, right? Like, we don't always need to expose every thought that's happening in there and every feeling that's happening in there. But she, the pressure, and I just thought it was so interesting that even a young child already feels the pressure of like right and wrong feelings.
Yes. No, it's pronounced. I mean, and I think that what I hoped and kind of knew would happen with the book, and I've gotten a lot of these messages from women who say, like, I feel like you're in my head. I feel like you wrote this book about me. We're the same person. I have the same experiences. And in part because, like, these cultural voices are so insistent and we internalize them young and then you think it's you, right? Or then you try, in my experience, then I tried to assign them all to my parents. And then I was like, wait, this doesn't connect. And the God thing is funny because you look at my book and people think it's a takedown of religion or it's about religion, and that's, yes, the superstructure. But the argument is like, this is culture, right? We live in a Judeo-Christian patriarchy. This is culture. We're all taking this bath. I didn't grow up in a religious household. I went to a hippie school with no grades. Like my parents tried in some ways to protect me or shield me from all of this, and yet here I am, kind of obsessed with religion. And no, but it's funny. Only in retrospect, I'm like, oh right, my college thesis was about John Milton and Paradise Lost, and but these things are so persistent. And on the edge of our consciousness in a way that I think they become visible and insidious and in us without subtracting, like without saying, yes, I believe in this or I want this in my life. So I'm not surprised that your 4-year-old had already we whispered into each other's ears. It's highly, highly contagious. And if you hear, I remember hearing about how I as like a half Jew, that I was going to hell from my cousin in Iowa, when I was small. Yeah, we're friendly now, don't worry. But that was like, my parents weren't telling me that. But I am glad your team is reading it, and I hope I see some men, so that's exciting because while I didn't write the book for men, I do think men need it. And I think younger generations need it in a way to explain the psychology of women, because for my husband it was illuminating because he's not the one he doesn't bribe me about making dinner and is the house clean and what are the extracurricular, like that's me. That's an internal cattle prod that he is constantly trying to sidestep, blame for. And it took writing this book for me to stop in the back of my mind blaming him somehow for putting this on me.
Like, even if he's not saying it, he's thinking it. You just believe in the expectations, even if he's not.
Yeah. And instead, he's like, I'm not the one who told you to fly home from New York for one day, to go to a parent-teacher conference in person when there's Zoom. That's you. But yeah. But now he has more sympathy. Like, I think it's more conscious of sort of what's running me.
And what kinds of conversations are you having with your boys? Because they're young, but they're not too young. I mean, they're too young for this.
Yeah. No, I haven't had any, like, do you know what the patriarchy is? I mean, it's been more just as a parent, making room for all of their feelings. It's been more with Rob, as a dad and his instinct to, and I write about this in the sadness chapter, but we have a very, both of our kids are quite sensitive, but our oldest is very sensitive and empathic, and it was really overwhelming for my husband because he just wanted to shut it down. And that's what happens to boys. And a lot of it is driven out of anxiety of like, I hope you're not gonna like do this at school, or get mocked, like I'm trying, it comes from a place of protection. But sort of bringing his attention to it to be like, this is you're the same, and this was shut down, And so that's why it is so triggering. I mean, it's really interesting, very triggering to him in a way that it's just not for me. I can be very, very present with my kids when they're melting. But so it's more that, just like being there while the boys in particular, because isn't the research, the science that little boys are more sensitive than little girls, actually?
Well, I mean, it's a little wonky research, but it is true that certainly from like if you look at anecdotally and ethnographically, you would see that earlier and then it disappears because for obvious reasons. But also there's some research, again, it's so tricky, but that the prefrontal cortex, which houses our capacity to self-regulate, is a little slower to develop in boys, in cis boys versus.
That's so interesting. And like it gets into this question of like what's culture and what's nature and.
But those, and some of those are very much, they're going to interact with each other, because if you are already at if already it's extra challenging, and then on top of that, you have culture.
Yeah.
On the other hand, the self-regulation that's taught for boys in particular, and I know we're getting super like binary there, but that is the way you self-regulate is to shut that down.
Yeah.
Which is a different thing than soothing yourself in a necessarily in a healthy way, or for co-regulation, like where you get the support of your loving whoever caregiver or someone that makes you feel like you got this.
Yeah.
Which is different for girls.
Yeah.
Typically.
I mean, we could definitely go into a parking lot and just talk about, I mean, and then there's a lot in the book about like how we don't really teach our kids healthy conflict, but that how girls are conditioned in the anger chapter, how boys and it's just children are aggressive. They have a lot of natural aggression, and boys are allowed to express it overtly, to yell and push, and girls don't do that. And girls express it covertly with gossip and alliance building and backstabbing. It's the same impulse. It's just not, I can't tell you how I feel, right? I have to go and destroy you.
I mean,
I can. We're past.
But yes.
But this is not who we are. It's just how we're conditioned to.
And we start so young, like if you look at, if anybody has younger children or if anybody's taught in a preschool or just observed a classroom, like it happens so often where a teacher, so well-meaning, will say like, look at Elise sitting so nicely in a circle while like two boys are just like swirling around each other and yanking each other. And just slowly the message of being really good, it gets you that attention, and the boys aren't getting in trouble.
Right.
It's just like
boys will be boys.
Boys will be boys. And it feels like, oh, that's not still happening today, but it is. I see it all the time. And so for those girls, those messages over and over and over, and it happens throughout the, all of school, it's still happening. Those girls keep getting reinforced. Like when they're able to be exemplary, they will get validation, and that will feel really good. But they're also the same girls that are not comfortable with a 90 because a 99 feels better, or I should say like a 93 versus a 99, because those are the same grades, but one of them takes just a little bit less perfectionism.
Yeah.
And the sort of work smarter, not harder, is really more boy behavior as they kind of get older and figure it out. And it's just, we've just reinforced constantly this good in girls. And it's not because they're like, it's not about the good where we think of like good, kind, whatever you have better words. But it's about this stuff that makes us feel like we're good.
Yeah. Compliance, obedience, performance, excellence. I understand. Like that's a leash I love, and
it's easier to do. It's actually easier.
You know exactly what's required.
Yes.
Yes, and you know how to sort of like go out and get your needs met in some way by towing that line. And it's hard because I think it's our instinct, as you said. It's well intentioned to like kids that are really easy.
Yeah. That's the other thing.
Don't have anything.
It is easier to be around someone who is making it easy for you.
Yeah, and you can dress themselves, and the research around young girls and boys is fascinating too. And the last thing on boys is just this also this persistent cultural idea that we have to turn boys into men, and you really don't hear that about girls. But that somehow there's like some rite of passage that if a boy doesn't submit to or pass, like he won't become a man. It's so perverse and so weird.
Having said that, watching girls and boys as they're evolving into young adults, it's hard to be a woman and not like let all of these ideas flood through like I'll speak for me. It's very hard for me to have these ideas. Now I'm aware of them. Some of them I was not aware of. Some of them I was, but we've talked about lust before.
Yeah.
It is still hard, and I would love for you to talk a little bit about lust because we're here.
Yeah.
But it's still hard to find the balance and not feel like there's a completely different reality for young girls than for boys, and to not. So I have 2 daughters, but it's hard. No matter what I want intellectually,
Yeah.
it is in there for me to feel like, don't dress like that, don't act like that, don't do that. And my reasoning, which I think is the upsetting part, is a little bit about how you will be perceived by men.
Well, and how you will make yourself unsafe. So,
Which is separate and most important.
yeah. So I write about the work of Deborah Tolman, who's a developmental psychologist, who writes about how girls are taught to be desirable, but never desiring. And what I see happening in culture is this performance of sexiness before people are sexual. And this idea, this like early objectification that's now sort of dressed up as like, don't slut shame me, don't body shame me, etc. Like I'm
Liberated.
sexy, I'm liberated, I can wear whatever I want. And it's like, sure, of course, wear whatever you want. But in our culture, it is the responsibility of girls to be the babysitters to rapacious male desire. Boys and men cannot control themselves. This is the cultural messaging. And your body, your safety is on the line. It is your responsibility to keep yourself safe. Because if anything happens to you, you carry not only the burden of the trauma, but also co-responsibility, if not more responsibility for his transgressions. And this is evidenced by of 1,000 sexual assaults that are reported, only 25 go to trial. It's like staggering the amount of sexual violence that happens to girls in this country, and then the way the script invariably goes to what was she wearing, was she drinking, how many sexual partners has she had, why did she get into that Uber? If anything happens to you, it's your fault. So until we change the culture, and part of that is like, believe women. To be sexually assaulted is traumatic. To have to talk about it and report it, and then be told that you're ruining some man's future is a staggering burden on top of trauma. And so, but still there's this, like, I think in Philadelphia, they used to call it the lying bitch unit. But data suggests that no one lies about sexual assault at any greater rate than they do about any other crime. It's very, very low, like 5%. But it's a terrible system because, yeah, girls don't want to ruin some drunk college guy's life. And yet there's no pursuit of any sort of justice, or like what would be like a healthy healing experience here. Like, how do we address this? Anyway, so that's like, it's hard because I have an 18-year-old niece, and it's so shocking. And every part of me is like, oh my God, something's gonna happen to you. And I don't want you to be traumatized and to feel, I write about sort of my own traumas, which I think are probably pretty relatable, unfortunately. But as a child, sort of an early molestation by a friend of a family friend, that having this feeling throughout my life that having people's attention on me was dangerous, that it was my fault. And these are the things that we internalize young, that it's my fault, it's my body that's dangerous. And I don't know how to protect girls from that horrible part of culture, but it's something that needs to be teased out. Like, if you're gonna be sexy, then I hope you're sexual. I hope you know what you like. I hope you communicate that to a partner. Like, I wish there was like a punch card before you can Like, are you embodied? Like, do you know what pleasure is? You know?
Yeah, and no.
Right.
I mean, they don't, and there's so much happening.
Yeah.
But it's really hard to tease it apart because in doing so, you can sound so patriot. Yes.
And patronizing. I know, but it's one of those things where I want to be like, oh, then do you own a vibrator? Oh, you're too embarrassed to answer that? Then like, I don't know. There's something about there's something about it where it's like, then put on a shirt. Oh man.
So that one is like a conversation that I could have for 100 hours because you are talking about empowering girls and you're talking about saying, not you, but we are wanting so much to. And also we're like, that's not what we mean by being empowered. Like how do we help them understand the difference? And part of it is also coming to terms with our own feelings about it, which is why I think that having reading and talking about it amongst ourselves will help. But this one is one that's just not easy. It's, I think, the harder of them for me.
Yeah.
That one, the lust and
well, because there's real danger. So it's the only one that's actual danger, like real trauma.
right. You can. The rest of them can be a work in progress your whole life, and there's no huge risk.
Yeah. But there's something so essential about our sexuality and that energy and feeling embodied. You know, I write about sort of like being dissociative for a lot of my life and having no idea that that's what was happening. I had no idea. And like, that's what if I could save girls from that experience, right?
Yeah.
It's hard.
And of course, if we could save girls from that experience, their pleasure would be so enhanced when they are ready for it.
Yeah. And ideally, we live in a culture where, like, you can walk around naked, it doesn't matter. But we're just not there. We live in a pretty safe culture.
Yeah. It is, so do you have a favorite, have you evolved in your setting favorites? How are we on time?
We'll do this as the last question. We're pretty good, but we can
Last
can
question.
really
and
go.
then you can ask. Yeah.
Is there a favorite? I mean, in terms of like what I like to experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I really enjoy getting in touch with my anger.
Oh.
Yeah. Which I can't say it's like gone. I still feel it in my job. But that's one. What's exciting or fun about the book is not seeing it now in people's hands and knowing that women are primarily women, that men are going to start book clubbing it and talking about it with their friends. And I think the more that we can experience each other, having like reconnecting with these impulses, the more permission we'll invariably grant to ourselves. There's not a lot of modeling. And so anger can be you can feel so alone when you're sort of at that point. And yet women's anger is often so righteous and essential for social change and the establishment of boundaries and the articulation of needs. And we need more practice, both experiencing it, learning how to channel it and funnel it, and also experiencing other people's anger as directed at us. Mm-hmm. And I say that as a white woman, that just being more durable and less sort of like, oh, you're upset, I'm gonna leave. But being able to sort of be resilient and to experience other people fully without being scared. So I'm really excited to be more in touch with my anger and to watch other women get in touch with their anger too. Scary.
No, but how wonderful in relationships to find out that, I mean, as you said, when it's channeled in the way that makes it serve both you and if you're, whatever the source of the anger is. but that it's survivable. Those are survivable feelings. Feelings are not dangerous.
And these are not.
That is such a key problem with anger in particular and sadness. Like we get so afraid that someone experiencing those feelings, ourselves included, are somehow not going to be okay.
Yeah.
Or the relationship won't be okay. And
Totally.
there's something so freeing and magical, and if everybody can give that gift to their kids of knowing that like
survivable. I mean, I talk a lot about anger, fear of anger attached to fear of relational loss and social exclusion, et cetera. And I write about, many of you guys have probably read Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication, but he has this term, which I think is really important, which is not like, I'm angry, at you. It's, I'm angry because I am needing. And so he talks about it as emotional liberation as you move from blaming other people, blaming yourself, taking responsibility for other people's feelings or assuming they should take responsibility for yours, to like a clear ownership of your own feelings and your own needs and then expressing it that way. I am angry because I am needing you to support me more at home. I'm angry, whatever it is, so that it's not a blame, like projection disaster, but it's actually something, a need that then can be met. Does anyone have any questions? Parenting questions?
It's true. It's more of a comment or an observation, but so I work in HR and dealing with employee relations and
Fun.
it's and I work at an elementary school too, so I'm it's like end of year, people are just wiped and tired. But oftentimes when you get in conflict, people don't even know what their needs are.
Yeah.
So it's so hard to even like come to the first couple of meetings and think, what's your needs? I mean, most people don't even know. That's in a journey in itself.
Yeah.
But I guess my question is, and I haven't finished reading the book, but do you touch on that? How do people?
Yeah.
That's something that we just don't talk about in
Right.
our culture.
No, I think in part because women just like needs, wants,
yes.
like we are sort of have been servants, to our families and to culture. If Carol Gilligan talks about another incredible psychologist talks about the formation of morality in girls and boys, and that boys are learning how they want to be in the world while girls start to try to figure out how to be of service to the world. And this sort of lack of knowledge that we have about ourselves. And here's another stunning Carol Gilligan quote that she talks about at a certain point with boys and girls, the word don't enters their vocabulary. And for boys, it's I don't care. And for girls, it's I don't know. And so you think about that severing with girls and women too, where we just start, it's like it becomes so bad that we're like, and it comes out sideways. And I think that part of it is like a training. I don't know what I'm feeling. And my instinct, of course, speaking of sloth, is whenever I get sort of upset, I just do stuff and busy over it. And now, like after writing the book, trying to interrupt that, like what's happening? What am I feeling? What's happening? Why am I upset? Why do I feel like so irritated by this person? What is this? What information is here for me, etc. And I think for anger, it's just training ourselves. Like, what is it? Why am I upset? And I think part of it is like, what do you need? Like that sort of, okay, tell me like what's happening in your body. What do you need? What do you need?
I mean, feelings are data, not to make it so depressing sounding. What that
That's
is,
your
what
job.
do you need? I know, it's so warm and fuzzy sounding. But it is so helpful when you think about what do I need?
Yeah.
And what is this feeling telling me about what I need?
When dealing with because I'm married and my in-laws are way more of the silent patriarchy, when you feel more open and they're so shut off, because I have kids, as a woman, you sort of decide at some point to say, it's not okay with me if you say this to my kid or if you're mean to them in any way. And then immediately the response is like, she's crazy.
Yeah.
And then in front of my boys too, like, oh, Glenda did this again, like, because she decided to say, I'm sorry, not in an unfriendly way, I mean, in a mean way, but like, just like, don't say this to my boys when you're so different.
Yeah.
But you're still trying to make it work. But it's like, what if it's like, but I need you to evolve as a person.
So you can't change. This is fun for you. In-law question.
I mean, I think the in-laws are hearing every time we say anything, you messed your kid up. Like, you blew it. And so they get extra defensive and are more intolerable. And it's just a vicious cycle. For those of you who have in-law experiences like that, I definitely have not experienced that. And but we can't control anybody but ourselves. So it really is, you're getting more comfortable setting boundaries and not feeling responsible for how they respond about you. Because it sounds like, I mean, not to be defeatist, but in-laws are like, it's very unusual to shift that relationship unless you are all committed to doing so. And if not, it's better to focus on your, how you'll respond and how you'll set boundaries. Just because, I mean, my way of leading with empathy most of the time in those circumstances really is to think, well, whatever it is that they're doing differently or saying differently, they likely did with their child when they were growing up. And so anything you're doing that isn't that way is a silent statement of they sucked. And since that's too uncomfortable for them to imagine, the alternative is to say you suck. Like, that's just way easier and human nature. But maybe that helps, understand where they're coming from. Is what they're hearing is, you were wrong, everything you did was wrong, and I'm here to highlight that. And so then of course they're going to be flooded with their need to deflect and say, like, she's being crazy again, because otherwise what do they have left?
Right.
It's not really an answer. It's going to help, but
I have a book writing process question.
Yeah.
As someone who is on the front lines of so many deep thoughts, and thank you for that. Thank you all both for this conversation. And thank you. I know many of us are here because of the podcast and all those places that you take us through the questions that you ask and your own curiosity and, intellectual power. So you're on the front lines of all that. You're hearing all these cool ideas. How do you decide that this is the one? And if there is even a moment of that, and when you do, how do you stick with it? Was there the act, whatever, I'm not a screenwriter, but the middle where you're like the sag,
Yeah.
and do I leave this one for this other cool one? Because you're talking to people all the time.
Yeah. No, I never wanted to abandon this idea. So I've ghostwritten 12 books. It took me that many experiences, and now
All nonfiction? Was that ghostwriting only nonfiction really for people?
only nonfiction.
Okay.
And
You're about to blow my mind if you're like, all of fiction is also
no, I've never
ghostwriting.
I don't have the imagination to write fiction. All nonfiction. And my agent, bless her heart, but after a point was like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? And I like ghostwriting, it's its own thing, but I just kept telling her I didn't have a book in me. I really believed that, which is kind of funny. But I was convinced that I didn't have my own book. And the minute that we had, after my brother-in-law died, which I wrote about in Sadness, we had dinner. She was a college friend of his as well. And she was just like, what are you, again, like, what are you doing? And it was the first time that I really allowed myself to even open to the possibility that I could do this. And then as soon as I really stepped into it and said, all right, when I have an idea, when I feel that, I will do it. And then it was so fast before, it was I think of it as like a download. Like it was fast. It was sort of one day in Miami.
As one day's in Miami go.
It was a wild day in Miami that involved Glennon Doyle, Scott Galloway. It was a wild. It became. It was such a weird. This is like also what I love is the fact that someone. I had 2 book parties, and at the LA book party, someone emailed me and was like, "Only at your book party would it be like journalists, mediums, body workers, sex therapists." I really am very democratic about where I find wisdom, but I never wanted to abandon this book, and it felt so big. I just wanted to be able to do it justice, and it was a magical process that like kept opening. Where I didn't know at the beginning the history of the sins. I assumed they were in the Bible, and then sort of the revelation. And I love Mary Magdalene, so like the revelation not only that they weren't in the Bible, but that she was the receptacle for them, sort of blew my mind, etc. So there were a lot of those moments. And it's in some ways 8 books. Like it's each one could have been its own book. So it was so hard to distill it. It's so fun. I did hit a point of major resistance. I wrote it pretty fast, and I've been in some ways reading for this book for my whole life. And I wrote it fast. And one of my fears when I sold the book, I'm very clean and I'm fast. And so I thought I wanted to make sure I had an editor who would edit me. And my editor edited me, but it could have been passed at that point into production. But she pushed me so hard. That's why there's 25,000 endnotes and not 25,000 more words in the book, to distill and distill and distill. And I definitely had a horrible stretch in the middle where she asked me to restructure and create a formula, which is imperceptible to the reader about how she wanted the arc of every chapter to go. And I was like devastated by this feedback because I was so tired. And I went out for dinner with a friend who's a screenwriter, and he said, "I haven't read the book, and I can tell you she's right. Sorry." And then he made me follow into his house, and he gave me Stephen Pressfield's The Work. And was like, "Read this tonight, tomorrow." So I had that resistance, that like belly of the beast, crying under a blanket, cursing my editor, love. It was really dark. And then I printed it all out, cut every section, cut every part up, rearranged it on the floor in my very small house, and like then got back to work. And I realized she was right. What I had done in the early draft too was skip all of the current like easy slam dunk examples of these sins in our lives. I just like didn't write those into the first draft. And she was like, "You're missing like all the moment where people are like, oh yeah. Not funny. Yeah. Too obvious." And there was one other hand. Yeah.
Oh, sure. I was just hoping you could touch on the greed chapter. I haven't gotten there yet. But when it comes to women talking about money and building wealth, I have a company that helps women build financial security through investing. And I feel like that's an area where the culture still really has, even women who are very close friends still have trouble talking about their financial health together. And I'm just curious what advice you give women who want to have that conversation with other women.
Yeah. I, at least, was conditioned to feel like money was base and gross. And I think many of us like lack some basic financial literacy or have this idea that money is not really for us or that it's finite. And if I get more money, then you get less money. It sort of, again, like pushes against all of our feelings about what it is to be good. And there were a couple of, so Lynn Twist's Soul of Money, I love Lynn, and I love sort of the way that she talks about money as energy. For me, that was like a shift of men think about it as this infinite sort of like current, right? That there's their sense of markets and money is as expanding a river, whereas women feel like it's a pond that should be more hoarded. There's something about that shift for me, as well as the research that women are more generous and philanthropic. Women are actually better traders because we trade less, all stuff I'm sure you know. And that I managed to sort of, and it's hard because I think also women are more identified with the planet, right? We are just so much of patriarchy is about suppressing the feminine and suppressing nature and corralling nature, extracting, harvesting, mining, using. And so I feel like women just recognize like that this isn't infinite and that greed is, our ecological credit card debt is out of control. So I think it's also in us to sort of feel like we shouldn't want more. And I'm not really, at the same time, there's all this social, like women are CEOs and like it's your job to spend and prop up the economy and like you need this handbag. And so it's a very complex, like you shouldn't want more, but you should certainly spend what you have, which I think is like a double whammy of insidiousness in our minds. And so part of it, I think, is what you're doing, talking about money. I was talking, this is years ago, but I was talking to Sally Krawcheck and we were at drinks. And she's asked me, the time I had a full-time job, and she asked me what I made, and I told her, and she almost fell out of her chair because she was like, I ask women that question almost every day, and no one tells me. I know, but
I actually almost fell out of my chair that you answered.
that I answered, and she seemed like a safe.
No, but you're totally right.
Right, but she was like, it's always I make too much, I make too little. It's Goldilocks, and for me, I think, and for other women, it's like getting behind this idea of being a steward of wealth and a responsible like builder of wealth is helpful for me, and that if I make more, I can share more. But it's really tricky, and it's I don't have a great solve. Part of it for me too was I think so many of us are chased by these ideas of not enough in all spheres of our life, and my mom grew up with financial scarcity and is very crazy about money. She even went on Donahue. Isn't that amazing? With Gloria Steinem to talk about her fear of becoming a bag lady. This was like a big moment in my childhood in Montana. It's so weird. I mean, like we were not a connected family, so for her to be on Donahue with Gloria Steinem and Lily Tomlin, getting her makeup done, but talking about her fear, and so that was very present for me. Like she'd be like, "I can't buy a coffee." But it was just crazy, very irrational. But I don't think she's unusual. And so for me, I had to really write down, like, what is enough? Like, what do I need? What do I want? And that exercise, I recommend everyone do it because so many of us are like, it's just not enough. But what does it mean? And so to actually concretize it, I find very soothing. Because I realized like I actually don't really want much, and I pretty much have what I need, and I can like do this. I can meet this need, and I think particularly with all the messaging around what we should want, to be like, I don't want a second house actually, and I don't want a lot of things that I'm told I should, is clarifying. That wasn't a very good answer, but
Whole other conversation.
I wish I could really nail money, but I can't. Any other questions? Is everyone ready to read?
To read it?
All right.
Well,
Oh.
can I
Yeah.
be bold enough to ask you, like, after this, and you've had to put so much into this, what's next? Do you not want to?
No, I've been thinking, I've not allowed, so it's normally with books, it's like it's a tough profession, as you know, where, you get an advance, it's amortized over 4 years. A lot of writers are sort of already working on their next book, because that's sort of how you make it into more of a career. And by the time the book comes out, like by the time the book's in production, because I haven't been writing since last October. But speaking to the busyness and the wanting to sort of cover over all of my feelings of that I find uncomfortable, a friend of mine was like, you can't start. Because I was in this sort of like, if then, and this like getting into the same cycle. And so they staged like a little intervention. Like you can't just let this book happen and like experience it rather than hedging and protecting yourself by being focused on something else. So that's been what I've been trying to do. And I even made myself do a puzzle so that I wouldn't spend less time on my puzzle. I have two like big book ideas, and one feels so big I don't know how to do it yet. And the other one is what I want to try and like wrestle. It's hard because the Sims are such a great superstructure, and so finding something else that's immediately recognizable around like these big metaphysical ideas, it's hard. But
I appreciate your writing on your blog on spiritualism and just how you just tackle so many different angles. From that. There aren't a lot of people out there doing that.
Yeah, I try, and it's hard to make it so it's not like it's palatable to everyone. And so every book that I like thought about, including this one, has a vertical axis and a horizontal axis. And the vertical of this one is feminine to masculine, and the horizontal is the sins and how it shows up in our life. And so the next book I want to write on the vertical is about shadow and light, and how fearful we are of darkness, but also like an essential part of our wholeness.
That's such a great foundation because you have to get that before you can even begin.
Hopefully, it's hard to, it's like interesting as a debut author, like no one knows you. So that's been like also kind of fun to like sell out at bookstores because they under order, which is great. That's a great I'm sure you guys didn't, but I had like a very humbling experience. I was riding really high on my pub day in New York because I had done Today's Show the morning before, and like the book was high, like it had like popped and was doing better than we thought. And then I went to McNally Jackson, which was my neighborhood bookstore when I lived in New York. I used to spend all of my extra income there. And I hadn't seen the book in a while. Then I picked up my husband and we were walking to dinner and I was like, let's go to McNally Jackson and see it. And so walk in, there's like the new and notable books with like Rachel Louise Snyder and like a couple other people who pubbed on the same day, like big stacks. And there was no book, and my husband and I like split up, and he was like, I can't find it. And so I went to the front and I asked her, and she was like, oh, we have 2 copies. I was like, you have 2 copies left? And she was like, no, we ordered 2 copies. I'm sure there's a lot. And let me go look. And so I stood there for 10 minutes while she went to look, and then I was like, this is enough humiliation. And then I left, and 10 minutes later, a friend of mine, who's a writer, texted me, and he's like, I'm at McNally Jackson to buy your book. And she found them, and I'm buying half the stock. Yeah, so anyway, that was great. So this is wonderful.
But these are here.
Yeah.
For anyone who hasn't read this gorgeous book.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this. I've been like very moved by women like you, and some men who have just like been amazing champions and really like incredible. Thank you.
This is so easy to champion.
Oh.
This is magnificent. It's
She has
my
a book coming
joy.
out in January, so maybe we can have a reunion and do this again.
Thank you all for coming. And now I think Elise is going to sign the book.
Yeah, if anyone wants me to sign a book.
This is all allergies. I know people always say that, but it actually is. So, you're not.
Crying.
Yeah, it does seem like I'm
You're
like,
moved.
so, but I am.